This is Business Weekend with Ross Greenwood.
Hi there and welcome to Business Weekend. I'm Ross Greenwood and boy, what a week it has been. Stock markets, bond markets, currency markets and commodities experienced some of their wildest one-week swings in history after Donald Trump's Liberation Day tariffs came into being, then partly were withdrawn. But underlying all this is the escalating trade war between the US and China. Well, today on the program, we speak with the former US ambassador to China, the former US Secretary of Commerce, Gary Locke.
Consumers are going to take this and it's going to raise their cost of living, increase their expenses per household, per family. And it also means, quite frankly, that there's less money in the pocketbooks for Americans to spend on other things.
And for Australia, money laundering is a massive problem. It's also a problem for criminals who have to launder $12 to $13 billion worth of drug deals each year, to say nothing of the billions of dollars in illegal tobacco. Fighting this crime is the anti-money laundering agency AUSTRAC. It's notoriously circumspect, but its chief executive, Brendan Thomas, is exclusively with us on Business Weekend.
Hospitality, food, hotels, all of those things are being paid for by that illicit money. And it's important for Australia to know that funds in the licit economy are starting in illegitimate and illicit activities.
And after a week of debates between our political leaders broadcast live here on Sky News, there's a stark reality. If Labor has to deal with the Greens after the election, heaven help our economy and the energy sector if future gas projects are canned. So we speak with the Santos Chief Executive, Kevin Gallagher, who says if decisions had been made 15 years ago, Australia wouldn't be facing energy shortages right now.
The more we can do to get certainty around long-term policy, the better, and provide that assurance to our neighbours. Otherwise, they'll be buying it, as I say, from Middle East, Russia or North America.
So all that and plenty more coming up on the program today. But look, we've got to start with this week's economic and markets drama. The worst fear is that it will spark a global recession. What it has done is spark an alarming trade war between the United States and China, with neither nation seemingly backing down. Australia, of course, has a free trade agreement with both countries, and that's rare. Canada, Chile and Singapore are the other examples. But it leaves Australia, which has a huge trade deficit with America and a massive trade surplus with China, in a very difficult position. Upset the US and defence and other ties are threatened. Upset China and another round of harmful tariffs could hit our agricultural products in particular. Australia, though a small economy, clearly plays a strategic role, and that was demonstrated this week in a fiery exchange in the US Senate between Democrat Senator Mark Warner and US Trade Representative Jamieson Greer.
Australia got hit with a 10% tariff as well.
Senator, Australia has the lowest rate available under the new program. They ban imports of American beef.
Ambassador, excuse me. We already have a free trade agreement. We have a trade surplus. So getting the least bad, why did they get whacked in the first place?
They ban our beef. They ban our pork. They're getting ready to impose measures on our digital companies. It's incredible.
Australia basically denies access to its huge market, but not as a result of tariffs so much as non-tariff barriers to trade.
Australia also blocks on specious, fake science grounds, the export of fresh and frozen U.S. pork.
It's in the US Senate, remember. Now, one person with unique insight into the ways of both China and America is Gary Locke. He's the former US ambassador to China and America's Secretary of Commerce under Barack Obama. As ambassador to China, he was the first Chinese American to serve in that role. And I spoke with him earlier from Seattle. And first up, I asked him, who will blink first in this trade war, Xi Jinping or Donald Trump?
This is very serious because so much of what Americans consume every single day, and even businesses use as components every single day in the products they manufacture, come from China. And with these tariffs, when you add also the tariffs that President Trump imposed during his first term, are over 150%. That means the retail establishments, our Walmarts, our Home Depots, our Target stores and Costco and Nordstrom's, when they order something from China, they're going to have to pay more than twice the price of what they normally paid for. Well, that's going to get passed on to the consumer. And so the consumers are going to take this and it's going to raise their cost of living, increase their expenses per household, per family. And it also means, quite frankly, that there's less money in the pocketbooks for Americans to spend on other things. And so our economy will suffer. At the same time, jobs will suffer in China, because if China ships less to America because of lower demand in America due to the high prices, then there's less to make. And when there's less to make, you don't need as many workers, and that will lead to high unemployment or increased unemployment in China. The same thing in America. China is retaliating with almost 80% tariffs. That means the cost of that American good is almost twice as much as what it used to be. And so the Chinese aren't going to buy those American goods. They're going to watch what they spend on. That means less demand for American goods. Don't need to make as much in America to ship around the world. And that means fewer jobs. And that's going to lead to higher unemployment in America. So in a trade war, both sides lose, workers and consumers.
So you have dealt with Xi Jinping. You have dealt with Donald Trump on the other side. These are both two very strong leaders, pragmatic leaders. Which one of these blinks first? Who has got the upper hand in this trade war?
Well, actually, neither side really has an upper hand. Each country has different strengths that they can pivot to. China can really try to focus on domestic consumption. They can try to sell some of their products to other countries with which they have trade deals. They could really try to develop both economic and political ties with other countries around the world. But they can also say, you know, we're a proud country, just as Donald Trump is a very proud individual. And Xi Jinping does not want to be seen to his people, as well as people and countries around the world, as capitulating to America, because the Chinese for quite some time have bristled at what they think as America's dominance and almost setting the rules for everyone else and not allowing others to have input. Donald Trump, of course, is a very proud person. He's not going to want to be seen as capitulating, although he did reverse course with the tariffs on all the other countries around the world and pausing these extra tariffs for 90 days and perhaps even longer. So I would not expect either person to make a phone call to each other. And perhaps we're going to have to rely on a former prime minister or high-level diplomat that can perhaps engage in shuttle diplomacy and quietly bring together a deal.
So what type of person would that be? What country would you imagine that person would come from that would have relationships that are strong enough with both countries to be able to try and broker a deal?
Well, we have many former prime ministers from around the world, whether it's the UK or even Australia and other parts, and simply retired diplomats or even a high-level business person who's respected both in Washington, D.C. and in Beijing.
So one thing that strikes me also is with the dislocation of markets, even if Donald Trump is right with his tariffs policy, and even if he can bring manufacturing back to America, which is his aim, it takes time to build factories. It takes time to build a semiconductor plant, a steel plant. So there has to be an economic shock in the meantime until those plants are built, even if he is right.
Yes, and not all jobs can be brought back to America. Not all manufacturing can come back to America. It's even been said that there's no way that Apple can produce their iPhones in America at even close to the cost of what they incur in China, and that the cost of an iPhone in America would be exponentially higher than what it is now. And of course, with the tariffs, those iPhones are already going to go up in price, which is why Apple sent many airplanes to fill up the cargo bays with iPhones to bring them back to America prior to the tariffs taking effect. But it will take years to build a factory, a semiconductor plant, a high-tech plant. And it will not happen overnight. And in the meantime, the consumers of America will suffer with all these increased costs because so much of what people buy every single day comes from China. And there are very few readily available substitutes for the microwaves that we purchase, the clothes, the shoes, the tools, electronics, and the list goes on and on. And even if they try to move some of these factories, let's say Sony or another company, or Apple wants to set up a factory someplace else, it could take 4, 5, 6 years. And in the meantime, American consumers will pay the price.
So I know that you know Australia well from your time in the Obama government, and Australia plays a unique part, literally a relatively small economy, but strategically important between the United States and China. What role does Australia play into the future, and what impact do these tariffs the US tariffs have on Australia, for goodness sakes?
Well, the tariffs that President Trump wanted to impose on Australia really didn't make much sense, because we have a trade agreement between Australia and the United States. And the United States actually has a trade surplus with Australia. I mean, we sell more to Australia than we buy from Australia. So why was President Trump and his people, who said that trade surpluses and deficits are a key driver to these tariffs, why did he impose such high tariffs on Australia? So I think what's going to happen with all countries around the world, and certainly in the Asia Pacific, is that they're going to try to develop stronger economic ties with China, because is America really reliable? Can people take America at its word, whether it's on security arrangements, economic arrangements, or aid?
So then it worries me, because if suddenly you get very strong economic ties with China, then quite clearly China is seeking to increase its defence ties in the Asia Pacific as well. Does that therefore pose a risk to the stability of the world?
Well, there's a lot of instability going on in the world right now, and so people in the EU are questioning America's commitment to NATO. The people of Ukraine, of course, are questioning whether or not America will stand with Ukraine. Even the people in Taiwan are wondering, will America really come to their defense? Let's just hope that this trade war is settled quickly and fairly for all the parties, and that there are win-win solutions. And let's just hope that during this pause of 90 days or more, that the White House can negotiate some arrangements and deals that satisfy both sides, because we don't want a trade war. Certainly not with China, certainly not with Australia, certainly not with the EU and many other countries.
But as you sit there in America right now, and you heard about the concerns about the economic outcomes this week from the likes of Goldman Sachs and the likes of JP Morgan, is your grave fear that if there is not a settlement of the trade war, that a global recession or a global economic downturn is the inevitability of this?
Well, obviously, even though the markets reacted favorably when President Trump reversed course and announced the 90-day pause, the markets have since gone back down, because there's no guarantee that there will be an agreement after 90 days or 100 days or 120 days. And so that uncertainty is causing people to withhold investments, not expand their manufacturing facilities, not hiring more people, and consumers are worried. And so they're kind of holding back. And certainly retirees, with their pensions having been dramatically lowered and shrunken because of the turmoil on Wall Street, everybody's concerned, and everybody is very concerned and facing this period of unpredictability, uncertainty, by simply not doing anything. And that's how the economy can slow down.
Gary Locke, the former US ambassador to China and America's Secretary of Commerce, I appreciate your time on the program today.
My pleasure.
Let's now take you to the massive swing in the financial markets this week, some of the most volatile in history. Now, of course, it's all about Donald Trump, tariffs, and China's response. And, of course, it's not just the stock market, but currencies, commodities, and bonds that also gyrated. Now, those bonds are most important. With America's massive deficits and therefore debts, somebody has to fund them. And China has been one of the biggest funders. As stock markets fall, bond markets normally rise as money goes for safety, and therefore interest rates fall. But not this time. US bond rates actually rose. In other words, somebody somewhere was selling US bonds. Maybe China. And maybe that's the reason why Donald Trump blinked this week and had that 90-day hiatus in imposing those particular tariffs, except, of course, on China. Trying to work out the politics and the mood of a president who uses his social media platform to make key decisions and even to give stock tips is highly unorthodox. But this is all something that investors, big and small, have to adjust and adapt to. So quickly, let's just take a look at the Aussie stock market this week. On Monday, the share market had one of its biggest one-day falls ever since 2020. A day later, as tariffs were deferred, one of its biggest rises in history. On Friday, another big fall. Overall, our market, you can see it here, was just down by 0.5%. In other words, pretty good under the circumstances. Now, the big moves, though, would have rattled investors' confidence. And the biggest investor in Australia is the superannuation fund Australian Super, which has $365 billion in funds on behalf of 3.5 million members. So on such a volatile week, I thought it'd be good to catch up with Alastair Baker, who's the head of asset allocation at Australian Super, just to see how it navigates these moments of enormous change.
We certainly encourage our members to have a very long-term approach. In terms of, that markets have ups and downs. A crisis occurs where you might have a 20% drawdown in equity markets once every 2 to 3 years, and recessions happen on average every 6 to 7 years. So our investment processes are designed to have regard to the fact they occur, but we certainly encourage our members to focus on the long term. Certainly, as we've seen in the last few days, there can be quite violent moves in markets. And it's important to be invested at each time, not to switch and react to markets, because if I can use an example, Wednesday we had a very large move in share markets after an announcement, and that return was about likely 6%, maybe 6 to 7% return for the average super member on that single day. So if you weren't invested on that day, you've missed out on almost an entire year's average return on your super.
So the trick is there to be there for the long term. I get that. But then you would excuse your members for being a bit nervous, and especially those who are coming towards their retirement years who need to know what they've got in the bank account. Now, do you take any account into this when you're investing, or is it a case at that level of the person being pretty much on their own in terms of what they end up with in their superannuation pot?
Well, I don't think anyone needs to be on their own, Ross. You can consult financial advice, and we certainly encourage people, if they have concern, to consult a financial advisor. I guess the way I think about it for a lot of members is that if you use the analogy of a bubble, most bubbles create, and we talk about stock market bubbles, most bubbles pop when there's too much air in them. And in many cases, downturns in share markets are usually preceded by a run-up. And this one's no different. If you look at US equity markets, and in particular the Magnificent Seven, they have had a substantial performance outcome over the last 2 to 3 years. So for many members that have been invested over the course of the last few years, they've seen a good rise in their balance. And yes, of course, there has been a slight decline in the last 2 months, but over the long run, they've been benefiting from the boom. And when busts occur, in most cases, they are handing back some of those gains, but quite a lot of those gains still tend to accrue in their accounts.
All right, so of those 3.5 million members, and you've got from July 1 this year, 12% of their pay coming into your fund literally on a weekly, monthly basis. So the fact of the matter is you have significant amounts of cash that continue to come through the door. So in terms of your asset allocation, do you seek to change your exposure to equities when things get volatile, or do you try and stay the course regardless of what the equities markets are like?
So the broad answer is it depends, because it partly depends on how we see the economic outlook. But absolutely, the underlying point is that dollar cost averaging is something that people hear about when they might talk to a financial advisor. And as a fund, we do apply a lot of that methodology ourselves. So progressively investing over time improves the compounding of returns. In this particular example of the recent weakness in share markets, and we would say that if too much bad news is in the price, then it might be a better buying opportunity and an opportunity to add more to exposures. What we have to do is counterpoint that with what's going on with the economic outlook. So the potential for tariffs does have the ability to reduce economic growth, and that will have an impact on corporate earnings. So there's a bit of a balancing act between what you might call value, or what we're paying for an investment, and outlook being, what is the outlook for growth in economies. So it's a balancing act we judge whenever we're faced with a difficult market. In this particular case, we've got cheaper prices, but also a slightly weaker outlook.
Yeah, okay, so slightly weaker outlook. So I want to talk to you about that as well, because given the fact you've got the best part of $360 billion in that fund, it's pretty hard for you to change the dial. So even if you go and start to buy with the spare cash reserves you've got, chasing bargains, as it were, try to change the dial in terms of your overall returns. Given the fact that the funds are so large, that makes a difference for you as well.
Well, it can a little bit, but I draw a distinction here. So for a professional investor like ourselves, in terms of how we look after members' assets, buying individual stocks is something we manage carefully around looking for specific opportunities. But in my team, who runs the fund's asset allocation, we will tend to make investment decisions and go into the futures market. So there's considerable depth in global futures markets if we want to buy equities or allocate to fixed income. So short-term decisions can be implemented with a fair bit of depth and market liquidity. And then individual investment opportunities will be undertaken by other parts of our investment team, whether that's in Australian equities or the global equity market or infrastructure projects or the like.
I'll tell you what, it's really instructive, Alistair, because it gives us a sense as to how our biggest retirement fund actually manages the volatility of the markets these days. Many thanks for your time.
Thank you, Ross. It's been good to be here.
Coming up after the break, if the cost of living is what the federal election hinges on, then the supply and the price of gas is the key to all that. Without cheap gas, Australia is left behind in the world with higher baked-in prices. We speak with the chief executive of Santos, who warns about a Labor-Greens alliance that could kill off future gas projects. Welcome back to Business Week, and let's go to the energy policy that's a key part of this election campaign. Do we have a nuclear future? Will coal-fired power stations be forced to stay open for longer? Can transmission lines be built fast enough and cheaply enough from renewable projects without massively adding to the delays? Well, one part of the energy mix is clearly gas. Here the coalition promises to divert non-contracted gas away from international markets back into the East Coast grid to take pressure off prices. The opposition Energy Minister, Ted O'Brien, in a debate with Chris Bowen this week, said if elected, he'll seek urgent meetings with the gas companies.
So we've made it very clear that within the first 100 days of government, we'll be settling new arrangements with the gas industry. That includes all three. We cannot continue to have a situation where we have one of our major gas consortium taking from the domestic market and making negative contributions. That will be part of the negotiations that will take place with the gas industry.
So that will actually take aim at Santos and limit them? Is that what you're saying?
That will involve all three consortia. Santos is part of one.
Well, you can hear there one of the key companies is Santos. And I spoke this week with its chief executive, Kevin Gallagher.
Well, look, I think if you go back to 2010 or whenever it was that all the LNG projects in Gladstone got FID'd, took their final investment decisions, at that time there was a range of domestic gas projects that were in the pipeline. There was the Gloucester project, New South Wales, the Narrabri project in New South Wales, and of course the Ironbark project in Queensland. You go forward some 15 years, not one of those have been developed in that time frame. And I can speak personally about the experience we've had trying to progress approvals in Narrabri over that same 15-year period. And we continually get held up in lawfare and different legal and approvals processes. Plus, the rules of the game continually changing along the way. And I think if you take that into the offshore environment, we saw the delays on other projects like the Barossa project post final investment decision, post the major project approvals. And I think it's time, whoever wins the election, to sit down and look at the raft of approvals and the processes that these projects have to go through, the timeframes. I don't know what quartile we're in, but I reckon we're pretty close to the bottom quartile worldwide for the timeframes it's now taking to get major resources projects approved, if they ever get approved at all.
Well, I was going to say, you're a pragmatist. You've been doing this for a very long time. What is your hope? Because let's say, for example, a hung parliament, Labor needs the Greens to have power. The Greens vow that they will never allow another hydrocarbons project to be approved in Australia. Where does that place Australia?
Well, look, I mean, I think we're already in a world where sovereign risk is a major issue for Australia. And I've said many, many times that none of these major resource projects have ever been developed using Australian money. They've all required international funding, whether that be via major offtake contracts or direct funding into the projects themselves. And it's just the size and the scale of these projects requires that. Today, we're not seeing that investment coming into Australia. And you know, the most common issue that I get asked about when I go on my investor roadshows around the world is around sovereign risk and investing in Australia. I think we have an opportunity, no matter who wins this election, to sit down, to consult with industry, to see what we can do to improve and speed up those approval processes. And it's not about lessening the standards, it's just about speeding up the process of getting there and encouraging more investment into the country. If we don't see any more projects approved, of course, I think Australia suffers, because it will not cut down the amount of gas consumed worldwide. If anything, it just means that people using that gas across Asia or elsewhere will buy it from elsewhere, the Middle East, Russia, wherever, or alternatively they'll burn more coal. But it will not mean there's less gas being consumed globally.
OK, so then take me to the attitude of your customers right now, be they in Korea or Japan or in China. What do they say to you when Australia and the opposition, as you know right now, has a policy of sitting down with you to get uncontracted gas back into the East Coast grid to make sure there's plenty of gas there? But that means there's less gas going into those Asian markets, which they need to heat their homes and for industry and to keep their lights on. What do they tell you?
Well, look, I think, first of all, there's a recognition that gas demand is growing. In fact, more recent reports I read shows a 34% forecast growth in gas demand in Asia over the next 10 years alone, and significant growth in gas demand all the way through to 2050. And that's because we still have billions of people who aspire for the quality of life and the standards of living that we have here in Australia, and they need energy to achieve those aspirations. So we're going to see that gas demand growing. Australia's got a very long and proud record of being a reliable supplier of energy, gas in particular, into Japan, Korea, China, Malaysia, and other Asian countries as well. And that has brought about regional energy security, but also a period of regional stability, security, in other words. And I think in order to maintain that energy security in the region, we have to maintain our place as a strong supplier of gas to a region. More importantly, domestically, also supplying energy security for ourselves here in Australia. What I'm hearing from my customers is very pleasing, I think, that both sides of politics are saying that they will honour existing contracts. They're not going to threaten the sanctity of those contracts, so our Asian partners can rely on that. But nervous about what comes after that. No real commitments or visible signs that there's a commitment to delivering and securing gas over the longer term for our Asian partners. So I think the more we can do to get certainty around long-term policy, the better, and provide that assurance to our neighbours. Otherwise, they'll be buying it, as I say, from Middle East, Russia or North America.
OK, then take me to the Barossa gas plant, the gas coming from offshore Darwin, coming back into the gas plant at Darwin. First gas is about to arrive now, and in fact your first shipment is expected to be in the third quarter of this year. Does politics and the election, does that put any of that off course in your mind?
No, look, we're myopically focused on progressing that project. The FPSO, which is the biggest FPSO in the world outside of floating LNG vessels, is almost ready to sail. It's just a few weeks away from sailing, and we're still on track to bring that on production in the third quarter, as you've said, this year. and we're just finalising the last bits of infrastructure being completed as we speak right now. So the project's going well. It's on track, as I say, for third quarter this year, and we're very excited about bringing that in. And we've got all of that gas is sold to our Japanese and Korean customers and partners, and they're relying on that gas, to say, for their own energy security over the next couple of decades.
OK, then the other project that is key in all this is Narrabri. It seems, for whatever reason, to be stuck. And yet what you have said consistently is if you can get that Narrabri project up, then the problems of the East Coast gas supply pretty much end, because that gas is all targeted for the East Coast grid. But right now, it's stuck, isn't it?
We have made it very clear, Ross, 100% of the gas from the Narrabri project will be dedicated to the East Coast domestic market. None of that gas will be exported. And we've said that for years. That's been a commitment Santos has made for several years. Interesting when people talk about how much gas we need to cover us for shortfalls. Narrabri will provide, phase one for Narrabri will provide something like 25 to 35 petajoules of gas per year from the first year it comes on stream. So a very significant contribution, or add, if you like, to the East Coast market. Technically, we're more or less there. We're ready to go. The project was approved, I think, in 2020 after a very exhaustive and comprehensive independent planning commission review for that project. There's been a few challenges along the way. We've got native title approvals we're just finalising and going through that process. And we've got the pipeline, the Hunter Valley pipeline approval that's required. Once we get that, we'll be ready to take FID, final investment decision, but we're really just waiting for those approvals.
And are they easy, and can they be taken for granted, no matter which side of politics wins the election?
Well, look, I mean, it's a state-level process for Narrabri. Is it easy? I mean, I think your viewers would be laughing if I said it's easy 15 years in. So I don't think I can say it's easy or we anticipate it being easy. Look, I mean, I think the loopholes and the avenues for challenge exist. We're minimising our spend on this project until we get our approvals, because just like I talked earlier about foreign companies seeing sovereign risk, we see the risk around these types of projects getting too far ahead of ourselves as being too high to invest too fast. So we're holding back on some investments and really just investing to maintain our licence to operate credentials whilst we progress the approvals. It's really, I wouldn't like to give a timeline on it. However, what I would say is if we got approvals tomorrow, we could get started in this project and we could get gas into the system pretty quickly.
Tell you what, Kevin Gallagher, always good to have you, Chief Executive of Santos. Many thanks for your time today.
Thanks for having me, Ross.
After the break, new rules for professionals come into effect targeting lawyers and real estate agents who might be helping criminals get away with money laundering. Austrac Chief Executive Brendan Thomas is next in a Business Weekend exclusive. Thanks for being with us here on Business Weekend. For Australia, money laundering is a massive problem. Money laundering is a byproduct of crime. Cut off the money laundering and you stop the means for organised crime to operate. But money laundering is also a problem for criminals because they need to launder somewhere between $12 and $13 billion a year worth of drug deals each year to have to be laundered, to say nothing of billions in illegal tobacco. Well, Austrac is the government body that investigates and prosecutes money laundering and anti-terrorism financing crimes. Historically, it's been a notably circumspect organisation. But this week, I sat down with its Chief Executive, Brendan Thomas, in a Business Weekend exclusive.
Money laundering is a significant problem in Australia. There's billions of dollars being laundered through our economy every year, and it's funding awful behaviour. Drug trafficking, violence, child exploitation, human trafficking, all of that is a result of money laundering and criminals profiting from their crime. And the controls we put in place to help limit money laundering affect ordinary Australians. They affect the way you can open a bank account. Next year, they might affect the way you deal property transactions. And people need to know the role that money laundering plays in our economy and what we're actually trying to do to prevent it.
Okay, so this is the agency that does the investigation along with the Australian Federal Police. You've had some big busts, but given the fact that there is between $12 and $13 billion worth of drug consumption in Australia every year, and every dollar of that has to be laundered, the fact is this is just an ongoing massive campaign, isn't it?
It's a significant challenge. As you said, the illicit drug market alone in Australia is worth between $12 and $13 billion. All of that money is illicit. All of that money needs to be laundered through the Australian economy.
And all of it's cash. So in a cashless society, how do you launder that money when nobody uses cash anymore?
Not all of it's cash, but a significant proportion of it is cash. So what we're doing is looking at ways in which you can close down the opportunities to launder money through cash. You mentioned earlier some of our big activities against banks. A lot of that has been getting cash out of the system and putting controls around how banks deal with cash. We've taken action against casinos in Australia, and a lot of the results of that is moving cash out of the casino industry. So it's making it harder for criminals to launder money, and specifically to launder cash through those avenues. We've still got other areas to focus on where cash is still used. ATM machines, cryptocurrency ATM machines, which we've got a particular focus on. We're very concerned about being channels and avenues for people to launder dirty cash. But not all the drug money is in cash. People are starting to make purchases through cryptocurrency and other electronic means.
Okay, I was going to ask you about crypto because, to be fair, if I was a money launderer, I'd use crypto every single time. And the reason is because it's supposed to be not traceable, because it can be done in overseas jurisdictions and not necessarily here in Australia. I just wonder whether that is the type of thing that really becomes a part of the attention that you pay in trying to crack down.
Significant part of the attention. Money laundering through cryptocurrency is a growing business globally. We see some crypto exchanges in other jurisdictions dealing with hundreds of millions of dollars worth of dirty money. In Australia, we've got a reasonably large cryptocurrency industry. We've got about 400 registered cryptocurrency exchanges in Australia. Our colleagues in the UK, for example, have 40, a much bigger crypto industry. We've had a growth in Australia in the last 2 years of cryptocurrency automatic teller machines, and we're working very closely with the crypto industry to close down what we think is a significant risk of money laundering.
But isn't one of the big issues with crypto that I could really create my own cryptocurrency? So one of the real issues that you confront is just people creating their own cryptocurrency overseas and using that to launder. All these things are really technology is being used these days to overcome this big problem of trying to wash all this money.
Yeah, crypto makes things pseudo-anonymous. So theoretically you should be able to trace a crypto transaction through the blockchain. But if the information in that blockchain isn't accurate, you're still not tracing anything. It's moving very quickly, incredibly quickly, in large amounts through different jurisdictions. So money moves from Australia very quickly to other jurisdictions, in and out of different crypto exchanges.
And does that make it harder for you once that money is in a different jurisdiction?
Much harder. And money launderers are moving it very quickly between different crypto exchanges. So crypto exchanges might trace back 4 or 5 transactions, but once it's gone through 15 or 20 transactions, the trail starts to drop away and is much harder to trace. And particularly when it's moving out of Australia into some of our neighbouring jurisdictions that are less well regulated, we're losing sight of it pretty quickly.
So what you're saying is that the criminal enterprises, because they are genuine enterprises, that their ingenuity, their use of technology is very sophisticated.
Really sophisticated. And it's not just criminal enterprises. So it's not just drug dealers laundering drug money. What we're dealing with in Australia and globally are sophisticated money laundering organisations. So that is organisations whose sole purpose is to launder money. They bid for the jobs on the dark web, they outbid each other for jobs to launder money, and they're constantly looking for new ways to launder money, constantly looking for holes in our money laundering controls, and moving money around the world into different jurisdictions where they can move it much more easily. It's very big, very sophisticated organisations. They're investing in technology, they're investing in expertise, they're ruthless, they're brutal. They don't care who they hurt on the way, and it's all about laundering money and making profit.
And the interesting thing was talking about drugs and the $12 to $13 billion, but then you go to excise loss to the government just this year of $7 billion on illegal tobacco. Again, that's money that has to be laundered. A lot of that money is cash as well.
Very, very significantly, a lot of that money is cash. And the illegal tobacco problem is a good example of a growing crime that we've seen in Australia, where the profits are reasonable and the money is being laundered. We're doing some significant work trying to build the financial picture about how different elements of the financial system come together to allow people who are selling illicit tobacco to launder their proceeds. And through that, working with law enforcement agencies, be able to pick apart their business model, not only chase crooks, but make it harder for those business models to exist.
Okay, so we're talking drugs, we're talking illicit tobacco, but do you worry that some of the proceeds of these illicit trades are entering the legitimate business markets?
There's no question about that.
Oh, really?
There's no question about it. So, I mean, criminals buy things, they shop, they buy houses, they buy cars, they spend their profits on the normal things that you and I would spend those profits on. I mean, you look at the work we've done on casinos and closing down casino junket operators. That's taken millions of dollars out of the casino industry, and that millions of dollars was supporting other types of activity, hospitality, food, hotels, all of those things were being paid for by that illicit money. And it's important for Australia to know that funds in the illicit economy are starting in illegitimate and illicit activities.
Because that warps the whole nature of the economy. If all of a sudden house prices are higher because people are paying cash with illicit money and they can afford to pay more, it warps the cost of goods in Australia. All of this can be affected by the laundering of this dirty money.
Certainly does. I mean, real estate's a great example where we're not only dealing with the proceeds of Australian crime, but Australia is an attractive location for international criminals, not only to launder and wash money, but to store their wealth. So what money launderers often are trying to do is to make illegitimate money look legitimate, but what they also want to do is store that illegitimate wealth somewhere where that value can be maintained. Australian real estate holds its value pretty well, as you know, and buying property with illicit money is a great way to store your wealth.
Okay, which brings me to your tipping off laws. Just explain what they are, because they bring into the net real estate agents and lawyers who previously have been pretty much immune from having to tip off their clients if they suspect them of money laundering.
So the Australian money laundering regime has fallen foul of global standards. So it's extended itself to financial businesses, but it hasn't extended itself to what we generally call professional enablers of money laundering. Lawyers, accountants, trust and company service providers and real estate agents. So from mid next year, the Australian money laundering laws will cover those types of services as well. And so what that will do is place an additional level of protections across the Australian economy that will require professionals in those industries to understand the money laundering risk of their industries, to understand their client's source of wealth and source of income. So if someone's buying an expensive property and it's not clear where the person's got their income from, the real estate agent will be asked.
So what you're saying is a lawyer and a real estate agent can't turn a blind eye.
Can't turn a blind eye. And there'll be a legal requirement that they report a suspicion to us. So the tipping off offences mean if they do report a suspicion to us, they can't then go and tip the crook off that they reported them. It's a criminal offence to do that. And those laws have changed to make it very specific to that kind of behaviour.
Because lawyers and real estate agents, not being rude about all of them, but they were typical ways that money launderers would actually legitimise their money.
They certainly do. And we see things like criminals establishing shell companies that just sit on the books waiting for someone to launder money through them. Shelf companies that look like they're doing one thing but might actually be a front for money launderers. Organised criminals need professional enablers to help them do that. They need lawyers, they need accountants, they need trust and company service providers to give them the advice to be able to do those things. Sometimes we see those professionals acting in conjunction with organised crime. Sometimes we see them just naive as to what's happening and not really asking the right questions.
But that must frustrate you when you see professionals, very well-known people in Australia, basically helping to legitimise criminals' endeavours. That must be very frustrating that you could not go after them.
It's very frustrating, and it's very frustrating that we can't go after criminal assets because we can't trace them as well as we possibly can if these professions are under the money laundering regime, where it's quite easy for people to spend their illicit proceeds in certain areas without any checks or probity having to be conducted about where people's funds have actually come from. And it just makes it so much easier for criminals to profit from their crime.
Can I just ask you one question? We talked about casinos before and the crackdown you've had on casinos. Not far away from where we sit right now, in the last couple of weeks, there have been busts of illegal casinos. And I'm told that illegal casinos are springing up all over Australia right now, effectively because they don't have to comply with anti-money laundering laws. Does this worry you?
Yeah, that is a worry for us, and we work as much as we can when we uncover illegal activity, whether it's illegal casinos, unregistered remittance businesses, for example, under the carpet bullion dealers or whatever they might be, with law enforcement authorities to try and shut those kinds of things down as quickly as we can.
I'll tell you what, Brendan Thomas, it's great to have a chat to you. We'll do it again in the future.
Great to talk to you, Ross.
And that's it for the program this Sunday. Up next, all the latest news right here on Sky News. Business Weekend returns next Sunday, but of course you can keep up to date with all the latest business news with our daily program Business Now, 4:30 p.m. Eastern Time, and via our website skynews.com.au. Thanks for your company. I'm Ross Greenwood. We'll see you next week.